That one glorious word represents more than just the geography between the Sabine and the Rio Grande. It represents a unique idea and way of life. A life of rugged individualism, proud self-reliance, gritty toughness, and fierce independence. That is what made Texas, and that is what will save her again. Howdy, folks. Sam Houston here. I want to thank you for tuning into the Feed Bandit podcast. Feed Bandit is the Texas first outdoors brand built by rabid Texans, for rabid Texans, and all those who aim to be one someday. We unapologetically promote the ideals that shape our Texas pride and Texas first patriotism through our love of hunting, the outdoors, and the gear and apparel we create. Texas, above all else, preserve the tradition, protect the legacy. Check us out at feedbandit.com. And to repeat that great rallying cry from a former colleague of mine, liberty or death. Now, enough of my talking. Here are a couple of bandits that love Texas as much as I do. Enjoy.
Howdy, friend. Welcome back to the Feed Bandit podcast. Jimmy back with you. And on this one, we're going to continue our series on turkey hunting strategies. Getting really excited that more or less turkey hunting season is about a little over a month away as I'm recording this. So we got to get geared up for that. I was looking through my camo and doing an inventory of all my stuff yesterday. So just getting really excited to get out there and get some of those thunder chickens. And by the way, you can go to feedbandit.com and shop our store, grab our hunting camp polo. We got one out there called Thunder Chicken Camp Polo. So it's our tribute to the awesome turkey. But before jumping into that, I'm recording this on what would have been, 189 years ago today, the Battle of the Alamo started. So let's jump into our Texas history segment with that one. Two things actually happened interesting in Texas history on February 23rd. This date in Texas history saw the secession referendum pass by a landslide in Texas. So on February 23rd, 1861, on this day in 1861, the people of Texas went to the polls to vote on a referendum to secede from the Union. The vote was 46,153 for secession and 14,747 against. Of the 122 counties casting votes, only 18 cast majorities against secession. Only 11 others cast as much as 40% against. The referendum was held pursuant to a decision in favor of secession in the State Secession Convention. So that was on this day in 1861. Now, in 1836, on this day, February 23rd, 1836, the Battle of the Alamo commenced. And I got a pretty moving email as I'm on the email list for the Texas Nationalist Movement, which is kind of the main group of people spearheading, this idea that Texas ought to slough off the chains of tyranny and oppression from Washington, D.C. and become its own republic again. Well, I thought I would read this post that was done by Daniel Miller. He's the leader of the Texas Nationalist Movement, and he's actually the one who wrote the book that we're reviewing right now called Texit, and in another podcast or in another series on the podcast, which I believe which we would have just released the latest version by the time you're listening to this one. So you might have already heard the last recording of that series. So I'm going to dive into this, and maybe it'll stir some emotion in you. We shall see. Today marks another year since the fateful morning when the first shots were fired at the Alamo. While most focus on the final assault that would come 12 days later, It was on this day that the true measure of Texas character was put to the test. Travis, a 26-year-old lawyer turned soldier, found himself in command of around 150 men in a broken-down old Spanish mission. To their south was an army of thousands led by a man who had already proclaimed that no quarter would be given. It wasn't the first time that Texians faced long odds, but it was perhaps the most dramatic example of the Texas spirit in action. When Santa Anna's army appeared on the horizon, Travis didn't waver. He didn't surrender. He didn't retreat. Instead, he answered Santa Anna's demand for surrender with a defiant cannon shot. It wasn't bravado or foolishness. It was a declaration that Texians would rather die as free men than live as slaves to a distant government that had betrayed its promise. Those men who stood with Travis weren't professional soldiers. They were farmers, lawyers, shopkeepers, and craftsmen. But on that day, they transformed into something more. They became the embodiment of an ideal, that liberty is worth any price. The spirit of the Alamo runs deep in Texas, even today. You can feel it in the hearts of Texans who stand against modern-day tyranny. When politicians and pundits tell us something can't be done, when they demand our submission to their will, when they try to strip away our fundamental rights, we remember the Alamo. Travis wrote in his famous letter that he would never surrender or retreat. Those weren't merely words on paper. They were a sacred oath written in blood, an oath that echoes through time to remind us that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance and unflinching courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Today, as we reflect on that first day of the siege, we should remember that the men of the Alamo weren't fighting just for themselves. They were fighting for a fundamental principle, that Texans have a right to govern themselves. That principles didn't die with them. It carried us to victory at San Jacinto and lives on in every Texian who still believes in liberty and self-determination. The lesson of the Alamo isn't simply about brave men making a heroic last stand. It's about ordinary people doing extraordinary things in defense of liberty. It's about choosing to stand and fight even when retreat might seem more prudent. Most importantly, it's about understanding that some principles are worth living for, no matter the cost. We honor their memory not just by remembering their sacrifice, but by continuing their fight for Texas liberty. The battle lines may have changed, but the fundamental struggle remains the same: the right of Texans to determine their own destiny. Remember the Alamo, not just as a moment in our history, but as a living testament to the spirit of Texas independence that still burns bright today. That's pretty powerful, a powerful post there, and an appropriate post for this day in Texas history. So I'll leave you with that. I'll leave you to contemplate that one and to think, about, I don't know, what do you think about where Texas stands in relation to Washington and the Union right now? Has Washington sort of become that Santa Anna character to Texas that the Texans felt Mexico was at the time? I think you guys, if you listen to this podcast, know where I stand. But at some point we'll all have to make our stand, I reckon. So for the next 12 plus days, those folks were under siege at the Alamo, and then eventually they gave their lives to defend the concept of freedom and to live their life how they wanted to, not to be told what to do or how to live their life from a faraway land, such as Mordor, D.C. All right. Let's get into one quick article here before jumping back into the turkey hunting strategy book that we're reviewing. This one's out of Lone Star Outdoor News that I thought would be a nice lead in here. I'm sorry if you're hearing all these beeps and buzzes from my computer here. I got these chat things going off and this, that, and the other. And quite frankly, if I mute it, I don't know what that's going to do to the recording. So I don't want to mess with it. So but anyway, this one is titled Gobblers' Reactions to Hunters' Predators. And it goes, 2 recent southeastern turkey studies have shown the impacts of hunters and predators on wild turkey gobblers. Papers recently presented at the Southeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies meeting in Augusta, Georgia, detailed the studies examining how turkeys react to predators and hunters in both movement and in habitat selection. In separate studies, researchers from Warnell School of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Georgia looked at gobbler survival, movements, and habitat use in hunted and unhunted populations of eastern turkeys. In both populations, predation was responsible for about 12% of the total gobbler population. Of that, ground predators, mostly bobcats and coyotes, were responsible for 70% of the predation. But, interestingly, 30% of the predation occurred at night. Even while they're in the tree? The researchers attributed the nocturnal predation to great horned owls. In the hunted population, hunting accounted for 30% of the total number of gobblers. Well, that's interesting. So, hold on. Predation responsible for 12% of the total population. Of that 12%, ground predators were 70%, and 30% were, they think, the great horned owls. Well, that's very interesting. In the hunted population, hunting accounted for 30% of the total number of gobblers, and hunting mortality was additive to, bear with me as I change the page, additive to predation losses. The annual survivor of gobblers in the unhunted population was 83%, while survival in the hunted population was 53%. In both populations, neither predators nor hunters affected total daily movement rates or roost site fidelity, but in the hunted population there was a significant reduction in the use of core areas within their home range. Hunted turkeys also gobbled less frequently than non-hunted gobblers. That's probably why, and that makes sense, because at the beginning of the season, you can really talk to them, but towards the end of the season, it gets kind of hard for them to call back, to talk back. One of the studies used telemetry on turkeys, coyotes, and hunters and looked at gobbler movement during and immediately following interactions. The first observation researchers made was that interactions were remarkably few, and even during hunting season, turkeys weren't affected often by either hunters or coyotes. When turkeys and coyotes were in close proximity to each other, turkeys moved short distances and resumed their activities almost immediately. When gobblers encountered hunters, they moved significantly farther than they did when encountering coyotes. Oh, well, very interesting. So I guess it would make sense. They consider us more dangerous than the coyote. That would be my assumption or conclusion to that little statistic. Gobblers did not appear to make preemptive movements specifically to avoid individual hunters, but they did avoid the habitat where they could easily be detected by using open areas and secondary roads far less often during the hunting season. Smart little critters. After the hunting season was over, they resumed using these areas. While these studies may not be news to turkey hunters, it's nice when science confirms field observations. Controlling hunting pressure on private ranches will allow turkeys to behave in a more predictable pattern. While these results apply to the eastern subspecies of turkeys, they also give a pretty good idea of impacts and responses of Rio Grande gobblers. The studies also looked at the same impact to hens, though they are still analyzing that data. One conclusion, though, is that predators killed many more hens than gobblers. Oh, well, that was a quick end of the article throw out line there that needs a lot more explanation. Let's see, so hens would be killed more than gobblers? Maybe because they're protecting the poults or the eggs longer, and that's what the predators kind of go after, so the hens get in the way or die trying to protect them. I don't know, that might be my initial guess there. Interesting food for thought as far as that goes. All right, let's dive back into, I should say, the complete turkey hunting by Outdoor Life and see what we can find out, what additional information we can find out about turkey. So this next chapter that we're going to go over is called Where Does Patience Begin and End? One common trait of people today is impatience, the urge to force every issue, to get the goal behind us so we can rush to something else. Impatience may serve well enough when we strive toward a modest goal such as winning a governorship or becoming the president of General Motors. But when our goal is something really important, such as bagging a big old tom, impatience heads the list of countless things that can spoil our chances. Turkey hunting guide Doug Camp tells why impatience doesn't work. Quote, "No matter how interested an old gobbler may seem, there's no way to rush him. A Jake is more likely to go along with you, but most turkeys, especially the cagey old gobblers, just won't come in until they're good and ready. Like most guides, I'm anxious to have my hunter succeed, and I'm guilty of trying to hurry the turkey. I lose many old gobblers by not waiting them out." End quote. In turkey hunting, patience is vital. Of course, it's not the only thing you need in your bag of tricks. You must also have a sharp eye and ear, know how to hide yourself in the woods, and be able to call well enough so a turkey won't peg you as a jaybird with a sore throat. But none of these means anything unless you also have the mental stamina to anchor yourself and wait when all conditions are right. True, patience can be carried too far. You don't want to imitate a diligent bird dog in an old story who disappeared one day on a hunting trip. Not until 2 years later did the dog's owner find a skeleton still on point, with the skeletons of 10 quail just beyond his nose. Knowing where patience begins and ends is a matter of common sense. You won't sit in the blind all night, for instance, when you know that turkeys fly up to roost a little before dark. And you won't hunt in the middle of a logging operation with saws, tractors, and shouting all around you. On the other hand, I've sat for half a day in a severe thunderstorm because I knew an old gobbler was in the vicinity. I talked with him earlier, and perseverance paid off. When I brought my pride in, he was almost as drenched and bedraggled as I was. In my opinion, patience comes in many sizes, from 10-minute variety to the infinite. I've been in the woods with fellows who were nervous and fidgety almost from the moment they sat down. They squirmed and wiggled as though we plopped ourselves in an anthill. They wanted to smoke, they wanted to talk. If we'd remained immobile and silent as long as we should have, I would have needed a straitjackets to get them out of the woods. I admit that parking your carcass for long periods is not easy, even though you heard gobbling at dawn, found abundant food and fresh scratchings, and all other conditions are right. You sit and don't hear or see anything except the normal life of the forest, which can get mighty boring. But you know the turkeys are there. The turkey conversation you're carrying on may be a monologue only, but many times a gobbler or hen in the vicinity will investigate out of sheer curiosity. Suddenly you look up and see a turkey standing there. I know several hunters who build permanent blinds in stretches of woods that turkeys frequent. These hunters park themselves comfortably in their blinds before daylight, then remain there all day, calling at intervals. They get up and move only to go to a gobble. This is not my idea of the most exciting way to hunt, but it often pays off in roost turkey on the table. An acquaintance only a few years into gobbler chasing confided that he'd killed half of his turkeys by getting himself situated in a blind, calling every 10 or 15 minutes or so, for an hour or so, and then going to sleep. When he woke up, a gobbler would be standing there looking him over. "You've bagged half your gobblers by doing that?" I asked. "How many have you killed since you've been hunting?" 2, he admitted. I'm sure that's a pretty good average for this method. Still, there's more than a grain of effectiveness in it, thanks to the survival instincts that we've inherited from the caveman. When I know I'm in good territory and have no special reason to change locations, I'll often lean back against a tree and go to sleep. Though most of me may hang on to the border of the netherworld, remnants of the caveman's brain still function. I'm conscious of every sound in the forest around me. A pine cone falling, the snap of a stick, footsteps, any of those noises will bring me alert. The inquiring cluck or putt of a turkey will blast into my awareness. And real quick, there's a picture here of a big tom with the caption, "I was about to move, but then heard footsteps in the leaves. The cadence was that of a man, stalking cautiously. I was watching intently for a man, when the gobbler appeared, walking slowly, and he looked half as tall as a man." It's a pretty big turkey there. Those same survival instincts keep me from moving until I identify the sound that woke me. I've killed several gobblers in just this way, Had I been awake, straining every sense or feeling restless, chances are I never would have remained so long in one spot. Sleeping is a great way to keep patient. Stick-to-itiveness may come in bigger packages than that last for weeks or months or even years. I've known hunters who kept after one special gobbler, passing up all others from one season to the next. Normally, I'm proud of myself when I hang with one turkey for 6 hours, more or less. But the prize gobbler of my turkey hunting career, 2/3 of a century, outsmarted and outmaneuvered me for 3 years. I've bagged every species of big game animal and most of the birds, but my trophy of a lifetime, if I had to select only one, was that special gobbler. He was with 2 jakes the first time I saw him. The jakes were fully grown, but he dwarfed them by a good head and shoulders. If the butts of his wings could be called shoulders. He was the largest mountain gobbler I'd ever laid eyes on. By the time I could have shot at him, he was running and was already at the limit of the shot pattern, so I passed him up. But he set me on fire. I went back the next day and the next, all the rest of that next season. For the following 2 years, I confined most of my turkey hunting to the ridges and coves where he lived. I saw him any number of times and would have known him if I'd met him walking down Peachtree Street in Atlanta. I was convinced I could even identify him by his gobble. Several times while I was trying to work him, other gobblers came to me. I simply passed them up. At that time, the limit for the season was 1. I don't believe I pulled many boo-boos, but not a trick I knew would get that old boy close enough for a sure shot, and I tried 'em all. My patience was inspired by an obsession to bag that feathered Goliath. This was the kind of patience that comes in big packages. But the smaller kind of patience saved me on the day when that big turkey's luck finally ran out. I'd heard no gobbling that morning and worked in a circle to where my car was parked on a logging road. I leaned against the door, smoked my pipe of tobacco, and was about to slide under the wheel for the drive back to camp when the hunch hit me that I should make at least one last-ditched call. I stepped to the side of the road, yelped my box, paused a minute, and rattled the box to simulate gobbling. Then, loud and clear, that special gobble I'd heard so many times blasted back at me from the top of the next ridge, a couple 100 yards away. I stood, strained every sense, until he gobbled again to tell me that he was coming along the ridge, paralleling the ridge I was on. I sprinted away from the road and made a big circle to get in front of him on the ridge he was traveling. I sat down in a natural blind. When I yelped, he gobbled again and continued toward me till he reached a narrow ridge that branched off. He hesitated there for a long 2 or 3 minutes. When he gobbled again, he was on his way back to the management area where he lived. Meanwhile, another gobbler behind me had answered my yelps and was coming toward me. I left him and went after the granddaddy that had kept my blood percolating for 3 years. When he seemed to hang up near the top of the ridge, I built a quick blind and sat down to try to call him back, without much hope of seeing him again that day. I didn't look at my watch, and I have no idea how long the hunt took, but it seemed like the rest of the morning. I'm sure the turkey remained in one spot for an hour. He gobbled occasionally, then clammed up. I couldn't get another note out of him. In my experience, when a turkey hangs up, gobbles, and then quits, he either has lost interest and gone about his business or is on his way to investigate. So I settled down to wait, no matter how long, determined not to muff this opportunity as I had a few others. After an interminable time in which absolutely nothing happened, the rocks, roots, and sticks beneath me changed from dead, inanimate objects into live ones and began probing a tender part of my anatomy. At long last, I ran out of patience. There's just no other way to put it. I could visualize the gobbler wandering off with a hen somewhere or scratching placidly for grubs and shoots while I sat there suffering. I thought, to hell with it, and put my hand down to help shift my weight and stand up. At that same instant, a stick cracked somewhere in front of me. I froze, straining my eyes for the sight of a deer. After at least 15 minutes without seeing movement or hearing a sound, I was about to move, but then heard footsteps in the leaves. The cadence was that of a man stalking cautiously. I was watching intently for a man when the gobbler appeared, walking slowly, and he looked half as tall as a man. I was so startled I almost forgot to put my gun to my shoulder when his head went behind a tree. Then when he stood magnificent in a shaft of sunlight, I almost forgot to shoot. I knew by his size and appearance that this was the gobbler I'd been after for 3 years. And surely I would have missed him again if circumstances hadn't forced me to stay patient. It makes a fellow wonder how many gobblers he's missed over the years because his patience ran out. 2 more times I had similar experiences, both while hunting with the Roscoe Reams in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Georgia. At neither time were turkeys gobbling, but the signs were there, and we knew turkeys were too. Before daylight, Roscoe left me on a narrow bench and went on up the ridge to a place where he'd seen turkeys fly over the roost. For almost 2 hours I remained where Roscoe had left me. I clucked, yelped, and gobbled on each of the 4 callers I had packed along, but got nary a peep in reply. The morning was growing old. I knew if I expected to hear a gobbler, I'd better try a few more locations before the turkey throttled down for the day. I left my blind and moved down the ridge, away from Roscoe. I stopped and called a few times before I reached a gap and climbed to follow another ridge. Half an hour later, Roscoe, not having heard a gobble, headed for the bench where he'd left me to suggest that we explore other territory. He was brought up short about 70 yards from the blind I'd deserted. An old gobbler was stomping around it, clucking and popping as a turkey does when trying to find a hen he knows should be there. Since I didn't shoot, Roscoe realized I was no longer around. He yelped with his collar, but the gobbler had a fix on the first call he'd heard and came on towards the gap, looking for me. Exactly the same thing happened the next season, on the same acre of ground. Both times I went off and left a gobbler looking for me. Both times I flunked out because I had fallen short on patience. Once in the Ocoee National Forest of Tennessee, I picked up a fellow who was walking to his car a couple miles away. He was with 3 other hunters, he told me. Every season for the past 12 years, they had come down together from Michigan to hunt turkeys. "Have you got your gobbler this year?" I asked. "We've never killed a turkey," he replied. "None of us. But one of us these days, we will." Many times I've asked, Can you acquire patience, or do you have to be born with it? The answer is simple. Patience grows when you practice, and life will give you plenty of opportunities to do so. Sometime soon you may find yourself lined up at a grocery checkout counter, and there at the checkout a shopper will wait stolidly until a cartload of purchases is rung up, then decide for some reason to check them all again, then fumble for a check, neatly write it out, then fumble once again for an ID or two and fail to find them. Or possibly you'll be stuck in an endless line of traffic creeping along at 5 miles an hour when you're already late for an important meeting. One of my hunting partners uses time and traffic jams to practice notes on his diaphragm collar. Not a bad idea. And I've often thought that I should have a collar with me at checkout counters too. But if you can make yourself relax at times like these, staying calm and collected instead of fretting, you'll gain practice in showing real patience, the patience you'll need to collect that old longbeard. All right, well, I think that's a good place to stop right there. Patience. Reason probably not to go on and talk about it is patience is something that we all have to remember to have when we're out there turkey hunting. I have to remind myself all the time because you get so excited, especially if you call and then you hear a gobble back, and then 30 minutes, an hour goes by and you still haven't seen that gobbler that you talked to. Because a lot of times, hell, it's happened to me, and I'm sure it has to you, where you call once, they gobble back, you try to talk again, and nothing. It just gets totally quiet. Well, those have been the times that I've ended up killing something. And that required patience to sit there and wait for that turkey to finally come in. And it has been over an hour sometimes of sitting there. I'm sure people have waited longer. But that turkey did eventually come in. So patience is a virtue, as they say. And no more so than when you're sitting out under a tree waiting for that stubborn turkey, that stubborn Tom to come in, to your call, come into your decoy. It can be excruciating because then you have all these things going through your mind of, well, do I need to move? Should I move somewhere else? All the turkey can be over there, over that hill. But you gotta just be patient. That's why another reason why turkey hunting is my favorite, because it teaches you valuable skills like that. But take from that what you will. If you tend to be not a very patient person, maybe go back, re-listen to this episode, and then remember that before you go out to the field waiting for that turkey. If you are patient, well, then just take a nap, and maybe that turkey will be there. Maybe you'll hear him walk up, at some point during your nap. But anyway, with that, just wanted to remind everybody about some of the cool hats and camp polos we got out on the Feed Bandit website. Check them out. If for anything, you'll find something that's kind of neat out there that none of your buddies have right now or wearing right now. I can assure you that. So go out there and, grab you 1 or 2 or 3 shirts and a hat or 2. We'd really appreciate it. It helps keep the lights on here at the Feed Bandit podcast. So with that, thank you for listening all the way through. I can't tell you how much we do appreciate it, how much it helps. And we will see you on the next one. And remember, support your local feed store.
Well, I hope the bandits gave you an interesting episode that either entertained or educated you. Or better yet, both. Hell, I told them this podcasting thing looks harder to do than defeating Santa Anna. So if you would, please help them out by sharing it with all your like-minded friends to help the bandits get the word out. And don't forget to check us out at feedbandit.com and grab some gear and apparel to support the cause of Texas. Remember, Texas, above all else, preserve the tradition, protect the legacy. Finally, as I said some time ago on the eve of the great battle, and I vigorously repeat here again, be men, be free men, that your children may bless their father's name. Well, fellow bandit, until next time.